just gotta do 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 do. Okay, it is. It is on. It is working. All right. Now I might have to get up and leave early. On top of being sick lately, I've been having a secondary problem with the late night time slot for these streams, and that has been Granny recently not using the bathroom properly. And this has led to me having to do laundry nearly daily for the last few days, which means I have to take care of putting her bedding back together. I have to make sure she's actually cleaning herself. She's not been cleaning herself. She'll walk around in soaked clothes, and she won't change herself anymore. And this has been a change that has happened in the last week. And I don't know what triggered it, and I don't know why she's suddenly moved away from doing even like the bare minimum of keeping herself clean. But it has been driving me physically insane. I'm so exhausted now because most of my day is checking on her and making sure that if she's going to the bathroom that she's cleaned herself. So I don't know how long I have. If she comes in and she's soaking wet and she goes on to, I'm gonna have to get up and take care of that. That is the job that I do here. That is what allows me to live here, and it has suddenly gotten much worse. That all aside, I did want to get back into this now that my voice is actually working again, which is nice. It's nice to be able to talk without feeling like my voice is just going to cave in at any moment. And on top of that, while I'm not saying this is directly associated to anything happening in real time, I am always tempted when I see current videos of other people watching the show to, in real time comment, but I'm also not hoping that any one of these people watching, starting the series and just getting through, I hope none of them watch any of these, because I do not hold back. I will not hold back with spoilers. So, that all said, a very common complaint for Fishman Island is that it feels weaker. And I want to address that right up on the front of this, because this is the thing that a lot of people look at Fishman Island and say this is the series in decline. And I say this is one of the weaknesses that Oda received when he chose manga, a weekly serialized manga, as his medium. And I've said this a few times before in a variety of places. If people read Fishman Island like the start of book 2 in a novel, a lot of the complaints would evaporate. Because Fishman Island does everything that you would expect a book 2 to do. It reestablishes premises, it reestablishes themes, it makes sure that we are now aware of which mysteries are going to be central and answered in the coming story. It functionally serves as a recap of the previous book, thematically, in terms of characters, in terms of plot, in terms of mysteries. It sets the ducks up in a row and sets our main goals for the coming story. Coming off of Marineford, this ends up feeling like such a wonky, out of place thing, because you're watching it like you would a series. And in a typical series, you're constantly ramping the pressure up. Every story, the pressure gets a little bit higher and gets a little bit stronger. And One Piece is, in a lot of ways, a series, but he does everything narratively he can to suggest that what this is it's a reset. Is that he's reached a peak, but if he wants to hit a higher peak, he has to ramp things back down. So he's had the crew go on a break. He's had everyone disperse. The series itself stopped serialization for a month. They just stopped everything. So in real time, there was a physical break from the series. He did everything he possibly could to give this kind of reset. And Shibondi is the initial, like, tastes of that, of seeing everyone come back together and seeing the group all rally back together and get on the ship and get going on this amazing adventure. And Fishman Island is an excellent option for that because of the freaking gorgeous scenery. It's a fascinating story as well, and as we are now in current, starting to get to these payoffs, starting to see, when we got set up for the Emperor's fight, the Emperor's the fight against the four Emperors. Yeah, a lot of that started from Fishman Island. The poneglyphs are coming into play. We're starting to get more information on Joy Boy, on Roger, on all of that. And it's stemming from, and it's pulling pieces out of the setup that happened in Fishman Island. As we kind of expected, he had to step back and tell a more isolated story. And he did it in such a way that it fixes a lot of the flaws that he had the last time he told a story like this, which was Skypiea. In a lot of ways, Fishman Island is a reflection of both Skypiea and East Blue. The enemies in Fishman Island just do not stand a chance against the crew. In fact, this is the reason that they're doping on these power drugs, because they are so far behind the crew in terms of strength that they literally need to borrow power from their own lifespan in order to even have a hope to keep up. And even then, Horty himself is only even a slight threat, because Luffy's fighting him at 10,000 miles underwater. So, and Luffy's a devil fruit user, so he's more than a little weakened by this particular arena. And even then, he pretty much beats Horty. He pretty much beats Horty as an aside, because Horty happened to be in front of this ship that Luffy needed to demolish to protect the island, which was the real threat here. And that those themes are going to continue into the next story, where even in Punk Hazard, the crew is just stronger. Heck, even in Dressrosa, Luffy's only mildly challenged by the enemies there. Most of his crew are only sort of challenged, and the only reason half of them have to flee is because Big Mom shows up. Big Mom is the first time that the crew is challenged in the New World, very similarly to the path in the first half, where even Crocodile, who was a bit of a challenge, wasn't so much of a challenge as to be terrible. And even Enel, who was a pain in the ass, to Luffy wasn't a huge challenge, and the primary threat he imposed was the destruction of the land that they needed in order to survive. These are, and it wasn't until Water 7 that Luffy was actually challenged. Same things are happening in Fishman Island. And in Fishman Island, the metaphors are fairly clear here. Okay, my first watch through of Fishman Island, I also didn't like the arc, not for the reasons most people do, but because it really didn't jive with my understanding of racism. Like, it felt like a foreigner's take on racism. And a large part of that problem was that I was looking at this story from an American lens. I was, younger. I was much younger then. And I was, I had an idea of what racism looked like. And in America, it looks a very specific way. What I hadn't considered and what I saw on rewatch is the international version of racism. Because, and this may stumble some American audiences. The story here isn't an oppressed people that don't own their own land, that are forced to integrate into society. That is American racism. These are people, we have people who are, in fact, Skypiea is closer to an American-style racism story. And this is part of the reason that I really wish we had spent some more time with the Shandians. Because, that is very, very close to American Native Americans and American African Americans in terms of that structure of how the racism works, of what the racism looks like. Here, we're looking at a self-contained nation, a power unto itself, with its own army. The rest of the world doesn't like them, and that is a problem, but it doesn't prevent them from having a place to live. It creates specific pressures that create problems for them. They can't leave this place, so they can't really trade, so their supplies tend to be relatively limited, which creates this desire for a kind of bottom-up infrastructure in which undesirables are forced out there where there's not a lot of resources, and they're just going to kind of have to deal with it. And it's the slums, and who cares? That creates that kind of class pressure because there isn't a lot. Even Neptune at the top of this class system can have these magnificent banquets, but it's kind of clear that he's spending a lot of the nation's resources to do these things. And the nation just doesn't have that many resources to go around. He's kind of doing the best with what he's got. And he's kind of ignored a problem that has been growing. And it is and one of the good things that are shown here is that he accepts the mistakes that he's made. He tries to correct these mistakes. My voice is not doing as well as I had hoped it would be. That's why I'm drinking a lot more water. And yet, this story is about racism between two nations, racism between nations. You can in fact draw a much closer parallel to Israel and Palestine, really, in terms of the racism here. And the two approaches that are born from this extreme amount of pressure being put, the violence and the peace. Those that just want the fighting to end because too many have died, and those who don't see a way for the fighting to end until they're free. And the result of that juxtaposition, the result of this hatred that is born from nothing, that is born from hearing other people talk about it. In fact, Hodi's entire presence in the series is in this arc is chilling on rewatch, because you can see where people with privilege, and Hodi, this is the thing of how well written this is. Hodi is a being of privilege. He joined the army at a relatively early age. He was very skilled in the army. He's been given lots of money and resources and funds because of his talents. He's coming from privilege, but he's been bought on the idea that the reason that he had to come from nothing, the reason that he had to struggle so much, isn't because of the problems in the society that he lives in, but because of the problems from people up above that he's never met or interacted with. The other's fault. And it's this habit to say, it's this insipid habit to say, my problems are not caused by the society I live in. My problems are caused because of a group of people that look different than me, that either do or do not live in the same place as I do. Either one. The premise is false. The premise has always been false. But it's also been the most useful premise of the rich and wealthy. The Fishman Islands are structured with this sprawling slum around this single orb of light where all the rich people live. It is absolutely, the metaphors here are absolutely clear. And it takes Hodi's rebellion to make that rich class understand the problems that they're creating by pushing one group of people down and then giving them the sly, well, it's the other's fault, rather than acknowledging their own problems and trying to help everyone, and trying to get everyone on the same page. And Hodi's transition from rebel figurehead to angry old man is a metaphor as well. Those that are active and violent and vicious today become the hate mongers who can no longer fight for themselves but will drive others to hatred instead. All of those metaphors hold up just fine. And, Luffy in this fight, putting himself at risk, taking the blows that he doesn't necessarily need to take because of the problems that have been created. Because Hodi, who started this thing, it got out of his control. And this is another thing that comes with these kinds of violent rebellions, especially ones that are deeply rooted in racism, is that these things get out of control. When you start something like this, it will inevitably leave your control. In this case, it's a giant ship that Vanderdecken threw. And, you can, there's a few excellent moments where Hodi's like, the fuck is wrong with this guy? why'd he throw the giant ship? While Hody has to like take a few minutes to figure out how to make this part of his brilliant plan. And he finally decides, all right, fine, I guess we're going to just destroy the whole island. Because he's lost control. At that moment, he has lost control. He has lost all control over the situation. He is no longer an important actor in the forces at play. And this is what happens. This is what happens with these violent, racist rebellions. It's so hard, especially now, especially after January 6th, to not look at these events and then look at the parallels of what has happened here in this country and go, oh, shit. Because this is what happens. This isn't unique to America. This isn't unique to Fishman Island. This is a thing that happens regularly in the world when these sorts of vicious, violent, usually very racist, very xenophobic rebellions occur. Nations quickly lose control of their population, and the problem escalates to the point where the entire nation is destroyed. And the metaphor here with Luffy hitting the ship and trying to demolish the ship before it destroys the country itself is exactly how it feels. And Fishman Island ends on a lucky note of something coming by and saving, of chance coming by and saving. And this is another thing that we have seen in reality. The nations that survive this kind of rebellion, it's by chance. It's a few lucky things falling into place at the right moment to stop absolute destruction. You do not want to be in this position. You do not want to be in the spot where one person is battering at insanity, trying to break the problem before it destroys everything. You don't want to be in that position. And this is what these kinds of rebellions create. It hangs the sword of Damocles over a nation. And the few are going to scramble like mad to try and stop this sword from falling. But Luffy didn't actually have a chance of breaking that ship. As strong as Luffy is, as powerful as Luffy is, he almost broke the ship, but he wouldn't have broken it enough. There was no way he would have broken it enough to prevent the island from being destroyed. There's no way. He nearly punched through the whole damn thing. Because he is a fucking force of nature. But, he wasn't going to stop this thing. He wasn't going to be able to. It was luck that saved this nation. And, the message to those of us in the real world is, we don't necessarily have an author who has a point for our country to continue to survive, who has a reason to make sure our country continues to survive. There isn't an author sitting above us, going, well, I need this nation, in 5 or 6 chapters. So here's a lucky break. So you hang that sword at your nation's peril. It's a far better read the second time around, especially after recent events, because it rings so true. It's lessons that we should have learned, but never did. And it is, and I mean, there's a lot of good stuff in here. Sanji remains a problem. This is where Sanji kind of escalates from semi-legitimate discussion to, oh god, like, I understand to some degree that this is sort of Sanji's gag. This is sort of the thing that helps make Sanji funnier, lighter, sweeter. He would kind of be empty without it. And I mean, I guess to his credit, he kind of had this opening gag of like, oh, he's now like hyper fucking horny because he spent 2 years on an island where there's no women. And he doesn't drag that out for too long. He has that resolved in this arc with him being saved by seeing the princess. So I guess that's good to some extent. I do kind of like that we're in other shows, you know, where they do this kind of gag. It's an incredibly popular gag in anime. Is the nosebleed and the nosebleed fountain, especially in like hyper lewd, you know, ecchi stories where like the plot revolves around men peeping on women. And I mean, like there's a lot of that kind of stuff in Japanese media. That's all problematic. And he takes that and he goes, well, if they're bleeding that much from their nose, then they probably need a blood transfusion. And that's kind of fun. And then he integrates it. Into the whole, you know, reminding us about, into the whole setting up the blood transfusion dilemma. You know, and some people might complain that, like, Luffy's going to need a blood transfusion. Well, yeah. As much as he outweighed Hody in terms of strength, Hody still got a lot of good hits on Luffy. Largely because Luffy wasn't treating Hody like a threat. Largely because one of the new themes for the next set of stories is that Luffy is going to start underestimating his opponents. This is something new because Hody might be a medium tier threat normally, but he's in his own environment. He's doped up incredibly high on these drugs, and he has nothing but vicious, anguished rage to express. And then Luffy's not taking him seriously. Luffy's not seeing... And to Luffy's credit, he didn't necessarily need to. He had other problems on his hands. Specifically a gigantic boat that he cared far more about than he cared about Hody. Once Hody was no longer a threat, like... Once Hody lost control of the situation, and this is, again, part of kind of what Luffy does. Luffy always focuses on the central problem, on the thing that needs to be removed. He is constantly chasing after the big bad, chasing after the person that he's trying to save. He knows where he needs to, what the threat is, what the thing that needs to be removed is. The moment that ship is hovering over the country, Hody isn't the threat. Hody has no control over the ship. Hody has no power over the ship. All Hody is doing is being in the way. The problem's the ship. And at first it's, you know, be near the princess so that Hody can't kill her, so that she can lead this ship away. And when Hody catches on to that and kills Vanderdecken, I don't know if he actually kills Vanderdecken. I think Vanderdecken survives, but he knocks Vanderdecken out. And the ship now no longer is bound to the princess. Suddenly, Hody's not important anymore. And while he does want to make sure that that Shirahoshi doesn't get murdered, the bigger problem is the ship. And he needs to get the ship out of the way. Hody is no longer a problem. Hody is just an impediment. And so, yeah, he takes a lot of really bad blows from Hody, and then he pushes himself to an extreme degree. I mean, he does... I think this is the first time we see him use Gear Second and Gear Third at the same time in order to do the Gigant Gatling with hockey. Like, he is triple threading this goddamn ship after he's been severely injured. We're given several shots of him starting to bleed out as he is just gunning and pumping this ship with every ounce of demolition that is possible in his tiny body. Hody is not the one that nearly killed Luffy. Luffy nearly killed himself trying to save this country. And that ain't part of that metaphor. I don't know what is. The arc is fantastic. I honestly, and I think a lot of people looking back at the arc are starting to come around to the same conclusions of, on second read, this is really good. In a lot of the same ways that East Blue on second read is really good. Because there's just so much on the start here that's going on. There's so much setup. The things like the box that they go away with. The things like the swamp guy who keeps showing up. I hate him, but you know, he's showed up a bunch of times now. And he's been important throughout the whole damn story. It's these little things that get their seeding in Fishman Island, and this taste of, we're definitely doing something big with this country, because we've seen the reverie now with the Fishman actually coming up to the surface, and we're getting this tasting of, you know. And I know that one of the hopefuls is like the Fishman rising, and that is definitely, I 100% believe that is part of the finale. If only for the simple fact that the Fishman Islands are directly underneath Marajewel. Like, they're going to be involved in this ending. The conclusion of this story is literally going to happen in their backyard. So they're going to be involved in this ending. Oh, and my throat is starting to give up anyway, which is not a good sign. But yeah, and you know, I did want to spend a bit of time just talking about media in general, because I mentioned that this is like a weakness of the media. If this had been a novel, Fishman Island would be the start of book 2, and no one would care. But that is one of the strengths that novels have. Each media form has its own strengths and weaknesses, and as time has gone on, we're starting to see some strange mergers. There are now starting to be multimedia stories. Stories that merge images and words and even gameplay together. Each style has its strengths and weaknesses. And I think Oda chose generally very well in making One Piece a manga. I think it has added a lot to the wonder of the story. It definitely helps with the characters. It definitely helps with the emotional moments. It really makes this epic fantasy story pop, which isn't something that is common in epic fantasy stories. Epic fantasy, when they work, it's usually on the big ideas, on the imagination on the world, on living in the world. Um, Lord of the Rings, there's a lot of good world building and storytelling and interesting characters, but it's you don't have these moments of wonder and like pop. It doesn't pop in the same way. You in part of that is, the feel of the story is a little bit grittier. It's a little bit more based in a realism. The emotional binding of that is a little bit tighter. And it isn't to say that Lord of the Rings isn't capable of having emotional moments or wonderful moments. It does have many impressive moments. But a lot of that story is the world. A lot of that story is just how impressive the world is. The Odyssey is very much the same way. You don't have as much in terms of character emotional moments as you do world building. People only kind of vaguely remember the hero of the Odyssey. They're more likely to remember that he faced the Cyclops at some point. He faced Cersei at some point. These are he was in the I believe he was the one that was in the fucking Trojan horse. Like, these are the things that people remember, the impressive stuff, the interesting world moments, the historical reckonings, or the times that the gods were challenged. Like, these are the things that people would remember. One Piece manages to kind of have all of that and also take a nice big slice of character pie and emotional world building and thematic world building as well. And a lot of that comes from the format. A lot of that comes from being a serialized manga, from being able to have these images and then it be animated. That is one of the strengths that Oda got from picking manga, and I think he chose very well. I don't think this would have worked as well in any other format. I think it would have worked anyway. I think his storytelling is fantastic. I think any way he did this, it would have worked. But I think this is the one that was the best pick for him. I don't see him being able to work standalone as like a single movie or a set of movies. I don't see it being able to work in like long form novelization. I don't see it being able to work as well as a game. There's too much specific stuff that needs to happen, and there's too much specific visual moments for it to work, for the pieces to come together. It had to be in this format. It had to be in one of the visual serialized formats. But that comes with some weaknesses. That doesn't mean that this is 100% perfect. It does mean that because of the serialized format, when there has to be a story break, when there has to be a separation from book 1 to book 2, he can't do that. He doesn't have that ability. Not to do it easily, at least. So he's got to kind of just accept, Some people are going to get a little bit angsty about Fishman Island. They're going to come off of Marineford and they're going to start reading immediately into Shibundi and Fishman Island because that'll be their ability. And they won't have the knowledge that there's a bookend here, that Marineford has ended one part of the story and this is now part 2. And we're kind of starting again. We have to lower our engagement, lower our emotional stress, and get ready for, a new introduction, build up, payoff. We've lowered expectations. We're starting again. That's just a weakness that he's going to have to, stumble over. Other weaknesses, he's not going to have as easy a time as he would in a novel or even in a movie in displaying backstories. Movies, you've got far more options in terms of shorthand. Books, you can spend quite a bit of time on backstory, and people aren't going to care as much. With a serialized manga, if you spend more than 3 or 4 chapters on a backstory, that's like weeks, months now that you're spending on a backstory. People are going to start to get a little bit annoyed. There are weaknesses that he incurs. There's penalties that he incurs, and some of those penalties over time flatten out. Others are accentuated. That would be true no matter which format he picked. He'd run into not the same problems, but different problems, because every format has its own strengths and weaknesses. Picking which format is going to work for the majority of the story is important, and specifically, you want the most important thing here, and I think the thing that Oda chose very well, is that you want the beginning to work very well, you want the climaxes to work very well, and you want the emotional moments to land properly. Those are the big 3. If you can land those, if the format that you have chosen picks for all 3 of those, you're good. You're good to go. You're settled. That is the format you want. Everything else, it'll come together on its own. But basically, the beginning, the ending, and the emotional hit points are the things that you want to stand out. And if your format can't do that properly, you should probably look for a format that can do all 3. Those are the most important points. Those are the things that are going to bring people in, keep them in, and give you the payoff that's going to get people to talk about what you've done. That's what you're looking for. And every format has different ways to reach those points. But different stories don't necessarily always fit into any format, unless you write it in such a way that it does. But as time goes on, we are moving towards the major formats being novels are still very impressive, though those are being kind of supported by audiobooks. Movies are starting to kind of fade and becoming supplementary to televised serial or TV shows, as the TV shows offer a lot of the same things that movies can do with a lot more flexibility, and are easier to consume. You've got obviously graphic novels still standing strong in their own category, though that's been a steady evolution as I've been discovering. And you've got video games filling out, as the newest of the lot, which is creating the tech that's allowing video games to occur is the same tech that is creating the offshoots of multimedia stories, where you can open up an internet browser and it's technically a game, but you've got words and you've got images and you can have music and you can just kind of use whatever's going to work the best for what you're after. And it's very fascinating because you can have gameplay where you need it, or you can have text or video or audio. The multimedia is a very interesting new storytelling tool that I think people need to look at a little bit more. Like right now it's very indie and it's in its kind of newborn phase, so every piece of media has gone through this newborn phase. Every media format has had this newborn phase. Books have had it where only a few people. First off, the first one is that only a very few people can have access to it. Way back when people couldn't read usually, so books weren't very universal. But as more people can understand the format, more people seek to use it, but the production tools are limited. And as the production tools become less limited, more people get in. Multimedia is kind of time has kind of compressed a lot. Like back in the day, it took books some hundreds of years to move from something that only the rich could use to something that everyone could use. It took multiple inventions to get to the point where you weren't just passing handwritten tomes around, but you actually had things like typewriters and printing presses that everyone could access and use. Video games did not have nearly the same timeline between only a few people could actually use them to the point in time when people could actually make them. Video games started in what? The 80s, the 70s? No, it was about the 80s. Was around the birth of video games. And by about 2010, so about 30 years, we had gone from a very small number of people can even use these things to people are making these things. Anybody can download a program to create these things. So time, as tech has improved, the time restraints have shrunk between, the gaps from start to finish. And multimedia is in very much the same range. However, none of these have ever had a different path in terms of what is early and what is later. Usually early versions, early stories are either instructive, oddball stories that don't necessarily go anywhere, or religious text, or pornography. That's just always been the case. Usually one of humanity's first instincts upon getting their hands on a new art form is pornography. It's just one of the things we do. We are horny creatures. And much is the same with multimedia. There's not a lot out there, and most of it's porn. But the tools are starting to spread a little bit more, and there are some fascinating things starting to kind of bubble out of the format. I have added this onto the back end of this because I wanted to fluff out some time, but now my voice is really giving up. And Granny's back there, so I need to make sure she's okay. I still made it almost the whole hour, which is great. That's better than I expected. But my throat is really killing me. So I'm going to call it in here. Good night.